Hi, everyone. My name is Max Fields. I'm the Associate Curator and Director of Publishing at FotoFest, and I just want to thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we are going to have a gallery tour, an online gallery tour of the third installment of our Public Life, Public Art series that is on view in the Washington Arts District. And this exhibition is called Public Life Recording the Blur, and it features four artists: Francis Almendárez, Wang Preston, Lindokuhle Sobekwa, and Cara Springer. I'm really pleased to be able to talk about this exhibition online, but if you have the chance and you're in Houston, um, there's no substitute for seeing this exhibition in person. It really is a special project that brings art to the public through large-scale photo murals in the Washington Avenue Arts District. Before I begin, I definitely want to give a shout out to some of our sponsors and funders, especially the Texas Commission on the Arts. Without their support, we would not be able to present such an exhibition with such visibility in the neighborhood. And I also want to give a shout out to our the hosts of this exhibition, the venues who have allowed us to present works on their buildings. So that's Papa's Restaurants, Love It Commercial, and then our friends at Silver Street Studios at Sawyer Yards. Thank you so much for your support. We really appreciate it. This exhibition continues continues a year-long project that FotoFest began following the immediate closures that were a result of the coronavirus pandemic that began in March 2020. Soon after the pandemic, FotoFest came together and started thinking about ways that we could present art to the public in such a way that didn't compromise anyone's health or safety. A huge part of this, a huge part of our thinking was cultural institutions have a responsibility to share art and to bring cultural experiences and to bring emotionally affecting experiences to the public. We believe that it's good for our public, it's good for our audiences, it's good for people in general. And, in Houston, during the pandemic, just like all over the world, institutions closed down, galleries were closed, and art experiences were really limited to Zoom conferences like this, Zoom calls like this one. And while those were a huge part of our programming, just like this program today is, we wanted to figure out a way that we could at least create transformational experiences in a one-on-one setting where someone who is standing in front of an artwork could learn something, could have an experience outside of Netflix, YouTube, and Zoom, and outside of the daily grind of going through a pandemic alone, but together. So this exhibition was part of our proposal in line with the previous exhibitions. And what I mean by that is that two of the artists featured in this exhibition, Wang Preston and Lindokuhle Sobekwa, were artists who participated in our biennial 2020 exhibitions. Wang Preston was in our 10 by 10 exhibition, which is an exhibition that celebrates the best of the portfolio reviews of the previous biennial years. And then Lindokuhle Sobekwa is an artist who was featured in the 2020 Central Exhibition, African Cosmologies, Photography, Time and the Other, curated by Mark Seeley. And the previous two exhibitions that we organized featured artists from the biennial, and they featured artists from the 10 by 10 exhibition, the Central Exhibition, I mean. And this exhibition, we wanted to continue on with showing these artists, while also bringing in two Houston artists to share their work. Because after doing studio visits and speaking with artists last year, we learned that a lot of folks were having, especially cultural producers, musicians, artists, writers, were really having a hard time being productive because, we're all locked in our home. And just like anyone in any business and the industry, folks were finding it hard to stay motivated and to stay inspired and creative, while headlines and real life disaster was inundating our kind of existence, right? So this exhibition is a reflection on the past year in a lot of ways. The title "Recording the Blur" comes from an experience, or comes from conversations that I was having with artists over the past year about their experiences during the pandemic. And whether I was talking to somebody in Canada, in the US, in Mexico, in Europe, or Africa, I was hearing the same things. I was hearing that it feels like time is flying by while simultaneously moving at a snail's pace, right? And a lot of this has to do with the sort of political, cultural, and social events that were taking place last year, right? It was a year of protest. It was a year of pandemic. It was a year of working from home and living at work. And so that complexity, in conjunction with the incredible rate at which news stories were populating our feeds on Twitter and in our newspaper apps and in the newspapers and on television, where every single day there was a new major event that had catastrophic consequences, right? And so, while we're at home experiencing the world through the windows of our computer screens and the windows of our houses, watching time kind of pass, every day there was a monumental event that shifted, or that had consequences that shifted our perception of the time within which we live. And so this exhibition is really exploring the relationship between these social, cultural, and political issues as they were occurring over the past year, and also that experience, this paradoxical experience of time, right? This experience wherein time seems to be moving at a lightning pace, while simultaneously, while we're simultaneously living in this period of suspended dread, is one way of thinking about it. The works in this exhibition are not pandemic works or coronavirus works. These are works. Works by artists who are interested in themes of intimacy, of publicness, of production, and time. These are artists who are thinking about movement and migration, and people in place. These are themes that have been common to contemporary art practices for the past 60 years, if not longer. But when we place it into the context, when we think about it through the context of the pandemic time, and when we think about these works in relation to a vocabulary that we are all kind of aware of now, post-pandemic, they become a little more loaded in very different ways. And I think that's going to be moving forward, after 2020-21, when the world starts piecing itself back together and normalization kind of takes over and we're back to, an unmasked society. I think one of the results of this last year will be that the vocabulary that was established during 2020 and 2021 will make it difficult for us not to see work in light of this relationship to time, relationship to mental health, relationship to social justice issues, which I think are very important. So with that said, let's get to the art. Like I mentioned, this tour is not a substitute for seeing this work in person. If you are in another city, make a vacation as soon as you can. Come out to Houston and see the work. Drive by the Houston the Arts District Houston. Download the FotoFest app so you have an easy way to navigate around and experience the work for yourself. But we're going to start. Let me click over here. We're going to start with an artist named Francis Almendárez, who's a Houston-based artist, an incredible artist who I've been wanting to work with for such a long time, and I was so pleased when he accepted the invitation to participate in this project. And for this project, he's presenting a new body of work that was inspired by works that he was doing while he was in grad school at Goldsmiths in the UK. And the project is called Denim. And for this project, what Amendares did was photograph these articles of clothing against a high-key studio backdrop. And let me get you a better view of what this looks like. The interesting thing about these clothing is that they were sourced from his immediate family members. These are denim pants that his family members would actually wear. or probably maybe still do actually wear, that he collected and then photographed in the style of stock or fashion photography. Now, the conventions of fashion and stock photography are quite particular, are quite strict, right? They're there to show off the sort of like quality and shape and form and texture of a new article of clothing. Well, here we have Amendares dropping these clothing in a seemingly like random in a random form, right? They're not folded, they're not pleated, while showing off the texture of these jeans in a kind of in a similar way, right? So you have a survey of the texture, the form, and the material of this work. What's interesting about the work for me is how many signifiers are loaded within this very simple gesture when the artist does this, right? So the artist is really interested in themes of movement and migration, in labor and production, and also I would say like family and community. That's another among other things. This artist has an incredible over with an expansive range of themes, topics, and issues that are explored within the work. But in this work, he's thinking about the way in which these articles of clothing act as a material history, a material archive for the experiences of those who are wearing them, right? Denim is thought of as it's the clothing of a laborer. It's the clothing of someone who is typically like working with their hands or is working who is working outside of an office context, right? So these are, and then also, on the other side of that dialectic would be denim is the is a icon of Americana, right? We think of James Dean, we think of the Wild West, we think of when we think of Levi's, we think about the horses on the back of the label, which you could actually see here on this article of clothing. You think about America and what it means. What's interesting is that when placed in context of the pandemic, and we're thinking about labor, and we're thinking about those who work with their hands, one part of that vocabulary that has shifted because of this pandemic is now we think of these workers as essential workers, right? And so Almendarez is thinking about how these clothings represent not only like a material history, but also a sort of a narrative of vocabulary that is shifting and changing, right? This work is also loaded in other ways. When I was speaking with the artist, he was describing the shapes and the forms of these articles of clothing as they exist within the final pictures, what we see now, to landscape, right? To a sort of mountainous terrain. And this is a representative for the artist of a sort of journey from Latin America specifically to the U.S., which is in line with his own interests in Latin American migration, and also a family history of moving, of making their way, towards better opportunity, right? Which is, or I have big brackets around better and opportunity in this relation, in this context. So these works are quite loaded in terms of what they represent. They're quite expansive in the ways that you can read them. One of the interesting ways you could read them is not only as a material history or a narrative of movement, migration, or of the individual subject, but you can also think about this as a way of thinking through the means of production. So another thing that the artist has been talking about is, I'm not just interested in how these clothings were worn, but I'm also interested in where these clothes come from, who made them, how did care factor into the making of the work, in relation to both the person who is using their hands to make this material, but also in relation to the person who has a relationship with an industry, right? With a manufacturer, right? Because often these clothing is made overseas using the cheapest labor possible, and it's typically an exploitative practice. between a laborer and that person who is running the company. So quite an interesting work. And for the installation, we presented this on one of the busiest streets in Houston, Sawyer Road, in between Washington and I-10. And we are presenting 4 of these works on this street. So drivers, we get about 1.5 million cars pass this area every month, which is pretty amazing. This show is the most widely attended exhibition that FotoFest has ever put on, simply because it is in a public setting. 5 million people seeing these artists' works every month, or every round, is pretty incredible. So if you're in Houston, definitely take a drive and check these works out. And if you download the FotoFest app, we have some additional information about the project, as well as some writing by the artist, which I think you'd be really interested in. Okay. So Wang Preston is an artist who had previously participated in FotoFest Biennial 2020 in the exhibition 10 by 10, which, as I mentioned, is an exhibition that pulls from the best of the portfolio reviews of the previous biennial, the 2018 biennial. Wang Preston has participated in multiple projects at FotoFest. We really love working with her. And for this project, I have a thing that says that people don't see the slideshow. Is that true? Let's see. Let's see this. Maybe that's better. Does everybody see it? Has everybody seen everything? Give me a shout if you haven't. In fact, I'll just go back quickly just to share, just in case. Okay, so these are the works of Francis Almendárez. Perhaps now that you can see them, it makes a little more sense and maybe a little more exciting. And so this is the installation. Okay, so for Wang Preston. So for this series, or for this project, Yan was really interested in showing something outside of the work that she presented for the 10 by 10 exhibition. And I proposed that we show this series of works that was commissioned by Open Eye Gallery in Liverpool, called She and He. And originally this project started off as 2 separate projects that kind of came together in the end for a public art display that happened in the UK, in Liverpool in 2019, I believe. So the work for this work, Wang Preston interviewed Chinese students who were attending the University of Liverpool, and she was asking them 2 different questions. She was asking for the female presenting subjects in this series, what is your daydream? And for the male presenting subjects in her series, she was asking, what makes you a man? How do you define masculinity? And this project for Yan was really an exploration between the ways in which Chinese culture and English culture share and diverge in relation to their definitions of masculinity, femininity, identity, sexuality, and gender. All of these things came into play. And this was like a really, and this is like a really kind of complex situation that Yan didn't really expect. All of the responses that came out of this from the students, when she would ask them and photograph them, were really unexpected for Yan. This was a project of self-discovery for the artist. So what we have here is a series of portraits that she collected on the beach, actually, outside of Liverpool, with these students, where she asked them to wear what was very comfortable to them, what made them that sort of represented their personality and personhood. And for the exhibition, what we did was we asked Yen if she could talk to the subjects that she photographed, the people that she photographed, and we asked if she would allow us to include their responses to these questions, which were often very complex. A lot of and if you download the FotoFest app on the mobile store, you can see these responses, and in front of the work you can check that out. But some of the things that she would hear, like for example, this person said essentially that for her daydream was simply to exist as a queer person without judgment in China. She found that in Liverpool, she had an easier time having friendships and oops, I'm sorry about that. Let me see. There we go. Having friendships and also just being generally more accepted, and wanted to take that back, that experience back with her to China, which I thought was quite interesting. A lot of the male presenting sitters that Yan photographed defined masculinity in a sort of rigid way, but also that she was surprised to learn that many of the sitters really didn't think much about that, didn't think much about the differences, that they were somewhat comfortable, but understood, but in their skin, but in the same realm didn't sort of acknowledge a sort of a patriarchy or a patriarchal society in either UK or in China. But you can read more about that on the FotoFest app. I also just thought generally that these photos are really beautiful, and that one of the things that FotoFest has done over the year is really show incredibly challenging work. And while the conceptual underpinnings of this work is really really powerful, it's also just really important to see other people in a year that we've spent by ourselves. And this is the install. So this is on Washington Avenue. And there are more works than we actually have presented here in this series. The series is quite expansive. And you can see in the reflections all of the cars. This is another extremely busy street in Houston. And we really designed this exhibition. We really asked venues around Houston to use their space based on where people go. What are the most trafficked areas? And that wasn't out of a self-interest. That was really like, how do we reach the most people? Okay. Lindokuhle Sobekwa is an artist from Johannesburg. And an interesting thing about Lindo is he's an artist who participated in FotoFest biennial exhibition in 2020, and was actually in Houston in March during the week that we had to close the exhibitions in response to the COVID pandemic. And that was a really interesting time for FotoFest. It seemed that overnight that we had to help coordinate all of the flights back for all of these artists and all of these curators who had come in to see the biennial, and get them back home before all of the airlines started closing or stopped offering flights to outside of the U.S. and not only that, it wasn't just the airlines; it was other countries were literally shutting down, saying, we're not going to let Americans or anyone to enter our country. That we need to enter this period of lockdown and quarantine. So Lindokuhle, who I'm going to refer as Lindo from this point on, so Lindo was one of these artists who we had to coordinate and get on a plane as fast as we could to get them back home so that they weren't stuck in the US for, God knows how long. At that point, we had no idea how long this was going to be, but we knew it was very serious. But the minute that Lindo touched down in Johannesburg, he immediately began photographing the world around him. Lindokuhle is a documentary filmmaker. He photographs his immediate community and his family members. To create these incredible photo essays. So it's not outside of the purview of his practice to see the world changing, just as we were all experiencing it, and work to document that moment. And so these are 4 images that we're presenting in this exhibition, part of a much larger photo essay that I'm sure we'll see in a large-scale exhibition sometime soon, or in a photo book sometime soon. But these are images that document that weird paradox of time, right? This like incredibly slow pace of domestic life, while this incredible lightning speed of social life in the news, or cultural life in the news, and in the world outside of our homes. And so, for example, in this photo, what we see is just titled "On a Saturday Night in Thokoza." We see people walking outside, experiencing their neighborhood. Right. This was the big activity in Houston. Was we can't really go anywhere. We can't do anything. We can't be good consumers. And so we went for walks, and we stood 6 feet away from each other while having conversations. And you can see on the right side of these frames, these 2 women walking next to one another, and that was the main activity of 2020, was having your COVID bubble of friends, and walking the neighborhoods and talking, kind of working things out together, right? But at the same, and here's another image that kind of illustrates that quietness, right? This is a once very busy and bustling street in Johannesburg that is now, quiet and tranquil. We all remember images of downtown New York City and Manhattan, where there were no cars on the street for the first time in 200 years, and no traffic on the streets, and no people walking around, no travel. Nothing. And so this is an image for the artist that represents that, the quiet nature of last year, this kind of return to, a less mechanized experience of life. And it's a beautiful image that he captures on a rainy day, so that the light is just pouring through. This like gold light is just pouring through the image, kind of giving you some warmth. So at the same time that we have these images that are illustrating that quietness, there are other images that we can relate to, right? And one of the things that I talk about in the curatorial statement is this idea of a shared global experience. And while the experiences could look different, and the sort of equalities or inequalities exist around the globe, right? Shared or access to healthcare, to jobs. Those things are very different all over the world. Well, a few things that we can all recognize is things like this. These are police military police driving around Johannesburg, enforcing the mask mandates and the lockdowns and the curfews that were taking place in the city. And just like the U.S., the police vehicles are somewhat ridiculous in their aggressive nature and their aggressive presentation, and specifically when the main concern is healthcare. I'm not sure what you need a turret gun for in this case, but it's quite intimidating. And if anything, last year, this conversation around policing, enforcement, and sort of justice via, street justice via police, was a main topic of debate. And we'll see a little more about that in the next image. So I wanted to include this image in this exhibition because I thought it has an obvious direct relationship to Houston. That's where George Floyd is from. And also because I thought it was incredibly fascinating to see this image that was being circulated all across social media, to see it in Johannes South and in South Africa, in the Koza, South Africa, being shared and thought about and experienced together. I mean, this was a monumental event in Houston. The death of George Floyd really sparked the most intense protests that I've been to in Houston, at least in the past 10 years, where, everyday citizens and concerned peoples were fighting or fighting against police murder and injustice. So I thought it was quite interesting to think about the pandemic year is not only a year defined by health crisis and a mental health crisis, but also through the shared experience of a crisis surrounding in relation to racism and to police murder and to state sanctioned inequality. And another thing that I'm quite interested in is the way in which the world is imaged through digital media. Images. The only thing that circulates faster than the coronavirus is images. So it's pretty fascinating to think about the ways in which information was shared last year over social media, over email, over TikTok. How did those and that image circulation has real consequences in the way in which the world mourns in solidarity for something that they find is a great injustice. And this is that installation. And for this installation, I tried to separate the images in a way that you can get you intermingle these quiet moments with also these moments of intensity, which I think is quite important. You can see that the photo was taken in with almost no light, so there's this incredible grain in the image. And Lindo photographs using film photography. So this is a project, or this is a work of art, a newly commissioned work of art by an artist currently based in Houston, soon New York, named Kara Springer. And Kara is an incredible artist who principally works with sculpture, images, video, and photography. And for this work, this was a commissioned work based on a project that Kara has been working on during her residency at the core residency at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston. And the project is called Oil Houston. And for this project, I'm going to get straight to the images. For this project, Kara photographed this thickened jelly oil in her studio on a small surface, honing in very closely to the texture of that thickened oil as she's pointing these lights or using the studio light in her studio, or the natural light from her window in her studio, that's casting these beautiful shadows and creating these beautiful reflections on top of this oil. Kara is really interested in the sort of in the apparatuses that are behind simple material histories, right? And for this work specifically, she's thinking about oil in relation to extractive capitalism. And extractive capitalism essentially describes the means of production and the relationship to a sort of pulling from the earth. So you can think of things like mining as extractive capitalism, mining for precious metals for things like computers and superconductors, or mining for oil, or drilling for oil, which destroys the earth and pulls from it to then be injected into some other capacity. And what Houston is known for two things, really, barbecue and oil. But oil is the driving force of life. But there is a inherent dark side to this giving of life, this like making life possible, right? In terms of like providing us with electricity and providing us with the means of transportation. Um, it is also, the practice of drilling oil and bringing it to the surface and refining it has destructive consequences for our environment that also make life unsustainable in many ways. And so Cara is really interested in thinking about how care factors into these sort of means of production that sustain life, right? We're seemingly trying to care for one another by creating, uh, by making products that help us, while also thinking about the local communities who are impacted directly by these mining practices, these exploitive, extractive process, practices, wherein like the laborers who are doing this overseas, are not, they're being exploited in relationship to pay, in relationship to health and safety issues, and also just thinking about she's also thinking about the consequences that this has on the environment. We can think about, climate change and global warming, where we have hurricanes as a result of, CO2 emissions, and we have extreme winters because of CO2 emissions, and thinking about, how do we actually weigh these two things? I think to try and solve that would be very difficult, obviously, to talk about those two things. But this is the installation. This is at the headquarters of FotoFest, and it's newly installed, just installed last night, actually. So please excuse my terrible iPhone photos. Like I said, there's no substitute for going to see the exhibition in person. And yeah, so that's it for the tour. If you have any questions, please enter it in the chat and let me know what you think. I know I spoke pretty quickly and it was a brief overview of each of these artists. So if you have any questions specifically about the work or about the curation, please let me know. And if if you would like to learn more about this project, you can always visit the FotoFest website, where you'll find information about the exhibition, about each of the artists, including their artist bios, and a brief description of each of the projects in detail on the exhibitions page. But you can also download, and I've said this many times now, because we're so proud of it, the new FotoFest app, which provides you information about like all of the artists, all of the images, and also it contains information that is unique to the app. You can't find this information on the website. This is information that is penned by the artists who are participating in the project. It's really exciting. We have a couple of upcoming programs being held in conjunction with Public Life. The next one happens next week on Wednesday, June 16th. I'm really excited about this program. It features Francis Almendárez, Cara Springer in conversation with the incredible academic from the University of Houston, Rachel Affey Quinn. That's going to be a phenomenal conversation. These are folks who are all interested in the politics and poetics of care, and the means of production and labor. I think it will be, and visual culture. So I think it will be a fantastic opportunity for you to learn more about their projects, those two artists' projects. We're also doing an amazing program with Celina Lunsford and Paula Tagnarelli that will be an overview of Anton Gautama, who is in our previous Public Life exhibition, Home and the People Who Live There. These are two folks from major photo world institutions, Fotografiska and the Griffith Museum. So definitely tune in and sign up for that event. And then on July 31st, a little ways away, we're going to do an artist talk with urban subjects who are interested in the relationships between urbanism, images, and social life, publicness, things like this. They're an incredible research collaborative group, and I think you'll learn a lot from that. I'll learn a lot from that. It'll be a really fun event. If there's no questions, I just want to thank you again for joining us. I really appreciate it, and I'm apologizing. I would like to apologize for a little bit of the technical difficulties that we had in the beginning. this little share screen issue. But I hope that you will be generous and share this video when it's archived on our YouTube channel with your friends, so that they can learn about this exhibition as well. Once again, I want to thank all of our institutional individual sponsors, include really with a major shout out to the Texas Commission on the Arts, who really, and the National Endowment for the Arts, who really helped us, bring this project to life. Yeah, thank you again for joining us. I'll see you on June 16th for a conversation with Cara Springer and Francis Almendárez. Bye-bye.